Hi, I'm Denny Wayman. It's exciting for me to present to you something God has placed on my heart over these last few years. After 46 years of ministry as pastor, as superintendent, working at the denominational level, I've learned a lot, and it seemed as though when I retired, God was saying to me, I want you to share the stuff that you've learned. And in working with the denomination, uh, I realized that my expertise, my doctorate's in pastoral counseling, weaving together what happens with an individual's personal life and their spiritual walk, that discipleship was the area where I could offer the most. And so at the last general conference, the denomination asked me to present a discipleship book. And so it was that point that I presented Discipleship Ecosystem. And this was something that had, in fact, been on my heart for quite a few years as I pastored our church, because I realized that there was a spiritual disciplines that would develop the fruit of the Spirit that would then influence the way we used our spiritual gifts. And so this looks at the fruit of the Spirit and how spending time with God in the spiritual disciplines, the 12 classic ways that spending time with God creates those. Then I was talking with a group of Free Methodists in Boston about this book, and so they wanted me to Zoom with them. And in that conversation, they said, you mentioned that what would happen if they got planted in toxic soil as contrasted to the presence of God. And so that got my mind going, and God inspired me to write Toxic Discipleship. And this is talking about how instead of putting our roots in the very presence of God so that we develop love, joy, peace, and so on, we put our roots in toxic soil, worship of self, the inability to have humble ambition, but rather selfish ambition, that desire to be willfully ignorant, those three primary soils that cause us to create the deadly sins. And so I took the 8 deadly sins and created then what kind of toxic soil are you in if you have that, and how does that impact our spiritual gifts? If, for example, in a good ecosystem, we have the gift of the fruit of love, and then that love is seen in the way we use our spiritual gifts. What is it when we have selfish ambition and we become a leader of the church, or we become a counselor or a teacher? And so you can see that the impact would be that the church ecosystem would be destructive. And then after I finished that, one of the things that I found true in life is that God tends to look at things from a Trinity perspective, from a trilogy perspective. And so I was praying one day with God, and I said, is there something else you want me to say on this? And just the one word came. God tends to speak to me like Yoda, just a one-word thing. He said to me, root bound. And I'm not a gardener. I didn't really know what root bound was. But then I began to study it and recognize that there are discipleship programs that create church people rather than people of God. That the very bonds and bounds that we have in many of our churches that keep us small because they keep us inward, and the root trying to grow to God turns back in on itself and is concerned about the self and how we compare with everyone else, and how is my spiritual growth, and how is our church doing compared to others, and we create then this root-bound discipleship program, which makes good church people perhaps, if church is meant to only be self-serving and inwardly focused. But it doesn't create the disciples of God. It doesn't plant them in the garden of God, where God gives us the fruit of the Spirit to nourish this famished world. And so that is the trilogy. I encourage you, you can get it at Light and Life Books at fmcusa.org. It's designed with questions for individual growth, as well as questions for small groups and other kinds of settings. I've had people establish whole retreats around these books, and over this book particularly, Discipleship Ecosystem. And so I encourage you to do that. Be a great Christmas gift, or for past Christmas, a birthday gift.